All right, let's start with the scenario. And it's one that I think is a little terrifying, actually, just because it feels so common.
Mm.
You have two people, I don't know, let's call them Sarah and Mike. On paper, their lives are, well, they're eerily similar. Same income, messy divorce a couple of years back, and this is the key, the exact same financial hiccup. A default on their credit file.
We're talking about the standard stuff here, right? A utility bill that got lost in the mail during a move, maybe a phone contract that didn't get closed out properly.
Exactly, the kind of thing that could happen to anyone. So same amount, same timeline. They both have a decent excuse. They both decide, okay, let's fix this. And they launch a dispute on the very same Tuesday. Logic would say they should get a similar result.
In a fair world, yeah,
Yeah.
you'd expect the system to treat identical cases.
Yeah.
Well, identically.
But this is where it gets just baffling. Sarah gets a notification. 3 days later, boom, default removed.
Wow.
It's gone. Her credit score bounces back. She gets her mortgage. Champagne corks are popping. She's, measuring for curtains.
And Mike. What happens to Mike?
Mike enters the void. 3 weeks pass, then 2 months. He's just sending emails into this black hole, getting those generic, "we have received your inquiry" auto replies.
The worst.
His finance clause on a new house is about to expire, and he is just sweating bullets. So why? Is Mike just unlucky? Did he, fill out the form in the wrong color ink?
It's so easy to assume that, isn't it? That his case must be legally more complex, or maybe you just got a grumpy case manager on a Monday morning.
That is exactly what I always thought, a roll of the dice. But today's deep dive is going to completely dismantle that idea. It turns out the speed of that resolution, it isn't random. It's not even necessarily about the facts of the debt. It depends almost entirely on who the creditor is.
This is what we're calling the creditor factor.
The creditor factor.
Yeah.
We are digging into some really fascinating insights today from Graham Dussel. He's the founder and CEO of MyCRA Lawyers, and he's spent 16 years basically acting as a mechanic for broken Aussie credit files. He's been under the hood for so long, he's basically mapped out the entire engine.
And what's so valuable about this source material is that he's looking at it from a really unique angle. MyCRA is a law firm, and that's a distinction we should get into later. But he's also analyzing this like a data scientist. He has 16 years of patterns that show creditor A behaves one way and creditor B behaves in a completely different way.
So our mission today is to crack that code, to move past this idea that credit reporting is some mysterious black box where you just feed in a dispute and, pray for a result. We're going to unpack the specific variables, the human variables, really, that determine if you're a Sarah or a Mike.
Right, whether you're waiting 14 minutes or 90 days.
It's really a study in organizational behavior, isn't it? We're going to see how corporate culture, compliance, and even just the personality of a risk manager can decide your financial future.
That's it, exactly.
So let's dive in. The source material kicks off with this core truth that just debunks the biggest myth out there, the myth of equality.
Right. The myth is that the whole system is uniform. Most people think there's one set of rules, the Privacy Act, the Credit Reporting Code, and every bank, every telco, every utility, they all follow them in the exact same way.
Which, as we're about to find out, is laughable.
It is. The reality is not all creditors are equal. And Dussel makes this very strong point, that the name next to the listing on your credit file, it matters way more than the listing itself. And the first big factor here is something he calls compliance culture.
Okay, compliance culture. Let's unpack that. Because usually when I hear compliance, my eyes glaze over. I think of boring paperwork. But here it sounds like it's the weapon you use.
Oh, absolutely. Think of compliance as the company's internal hygiene. So on one end of the spectrum, you've got creditors with what Dussel calls tight compliance.
Okay, so these are the guys who color inside the lines.
Perfectly. These are usually your major Tier 1 banks. They keep immaculate records. They follow every rule to the letter when they list a default. Their system is robust. If you challenge them, they don't just send a generic denial. They can pull up the recording of a phone call you made 5 years ago.
Wow.
They can find the exact PDF of the contract you signed.
That sounds impressive, but if you're trying to get a default removed, is that a bad thing? I feel like I don't want my opponent to be that organized.
Well, it's a double-edged sword. Their records are so good they can easily defend the listing. So if you say, hey, I never got a notice, they can instantly produce a time-stamped log showing when it was sent to your email and when you opened it.
So winning against them is harder.
It is harder because they have the ammo. But, and this is the flip side, they answer the phone. Because they're organized, they respond quickly. They might say no, but they'll say no fast. Or, and this is crucial, If they did make a genuine mistake, a computer glitch or something, they'll spot it and fix it, also fast.
Okay, so that's the tight ship. Now take me to the other end. The sloppy compliance culture. This is where it gets really interesting.
This is the paradox that really stood out to me. You have these other creditors, often telcos, utilities, maybe some second-tier lenders, and their internal processes are, frankly, a mess.
Incomplete records, inconsistent data.
High staff turnover, the whole 9 yards.
Right. The ones where you call customer service and they can't even find your account number because they migrated systems 3 months ago and things got lost.
Yes. Now here is the irony. Dussel points out that these sloppy creditors are often easier to beat. And why? Because, as he says, they can't defend what they can't prove.
I love that line. They can't defend what they can't prove.
It's the cornerstone of the legal argument. Under the Privacy Act, the burden of proof is on the creditor. If they list a default, but they can't produce the required notices or the original contract because their filing system is a disaster,
You have to remove it.
they legally have to remove the list. They can't keep it there.
So the mess is your friend.
It is. Well, it's your friend for the result, but it's your enemy for the timeline. And that's where the frustration comes in. Because their processes are a mess. They don't just lose your contract. They lose your dispute letter. They lose the email your lawyer sent.
So you're winning the war, but you're stuck in the trenches just waiting for them to find the white flag so they can wave it.
That is a perfect analogy. You might be waiting months for them to finally admit they don't have the paperwork. So let's go back to our intro. Mike might be dealing with a sloppy creditor.
He's going to win.
Eventually. But he's going to miss his property settlement waiting for them to get their act together. Sarah, she might have been dealing with a tight creditor who saw a small error and just fixed it in 48 hours.
That is such a crucial distinction. It's not just, is the default valid? It's how competent is the admin team at the energy company?
And that leads us straight into the second factor Dussel brings up. Because if you're dealing with a messy bureaucracy, how do you cut through that noise? What do you do?
Relationships?
Relationships.
This part really blew my mind a little because it makes the whole financial system feel like a small town. You know, it's not what you know, it's who you know.
It is very much that. The standard consumer experience, and I'm sure you've been there, is the call center queue. You call the main number, you wait on hold for 40 minutes listening to awful music.
Oh, the worst.
You talk to someone who's just reading from a script and who has, zero authority to actually remove a default.
And then the call drops, or they transfer you to a department that doesn't even exist.
So the source material highlights that MyCRA Lawyers has spent 16 years building these key contacts inside the major creditors. They are not calling the 1-800 number. They are emailing a specific person, let's call her Karen, in the compliance department.
They have the backdoor code.
Effectively, yes.
Yeah.
Dussel says they know exactly who to talk to and, just as importantly, how that specific company's internal process works.
There was an anecdote in there that I just have to mention. He talks about getting defaults removed in as little as 14 minutes.
14 minutes.
14 minutes. I can't even order a pizza in that time.
It's the power of knowing the specific trigger points. If you know that creditor X needs to see exactly 3 documents to sign off on a removal, say a driver's license, a stat dec, and a specific reference number, and you send an email directly to the decision maker with those 3 things attached.
It's an instant decision.
Instantaneous. Karen opens the email, sees the 3 things she needs for her audit trail, clicks delete, and replies, done.
Whereas if I send it to the general inbox, I might forget one document, send it in the wrong format, and then it just sits in a queue for 6 weeks until a junior clerk opens it, sees it's too hard, and puts it aside.
Exactly. It's this idea of institutional memory. A firm that deals with these creditors daily builds a map of the territory. They know Bank A needs a formal letter citing the Privacy Act, but Telco B responds better to a softer approach. It's all about bypassing that front line to get to the person with the delete button.
Okay, so we have compliance culture, how organized they are. We have relationships, who you can call.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about the third factor, because this one feels the most human and maybe the most frustrating.
The attitude.
The creditor's attitude. This is the difference between a business decision and, well, an ego trip.
That's a very good way to put it. Dussel breaks this down into 2 types. First, you have the creditors who take a commercial approach.
The pragmatists.
Exactly. They're just doing a cost-benefit analysis. They look at your dispute. Maybe their case isn't perfect, or maybe it's just going to take 10 hours of staff time to fight it. They calculate, it'll cost us $500 in man-hours to defend this listing, and gain nothing by keeping it.
So they just fold.
They fold. They realize it's just cheaper to hit delete and move on. It's a
Yeah.
balance sheet decision. But then you have the others.
The ones who fight on principle.
The principal approach.
Yeah.
These are the creditors who will fight everything. Dussel notes that even if their position is weak, even if they know they might lose in the end, they will defend the listing. They will force you to escalate it. They will drag it out for as long as legally possible.
But why? Why spend the money to defend a bad listing? That just seems irrational.
I think it's often about setting a precedent. They don't want to be seen as a soft touch. If word gets out that company Z folds easily, maybe they think they'll just get flooded with disputes. Or sometimes it's just plain corporate stubbornness. A rigid policy that says we never remove a default unless a court tells us to.
Which is just wild for the consumer. You're sitting there thinking, my legal case is rock solid. Why is this taking 3 months? And the answer is just because they want it to.
It really highlights that human element even in these huge financial institutions. It's not just an algorithm deciding your fate, it's a corporate philosophy on conflict. And if you're up against a principal fighter, you need to be ready for a siege, not a skirmish.
So we've covered the neat versus the messy, the pragmatic versus the stubborn. Now there's a fourth factor that complicates things even more, and this is when the debt itself changes hands.
Right, the issue of debt ownership, original creditor versus debt buyer.
This is a scenario a lot of people might not even realize happens. You owe money to, say, a bank, but then you're getting letters from a company you've never heard of.
Yes, debts get sold. A lot.
Right.
Often in these huge bulk portfolios.
So when that happens, what does it do to the removal process? Does it get harder?
It definitely gets more complex because now you have two parties involved, the original creditor and the new owner. But, and this is the silver lining, Dussel points out that this transfer is often where the compliance vulnerabilities appear.
The broken telephone effect.
Exactly. I mean, think about moving house. Things get lost.
Yeah.
Now imagine moving 10,000 digital files from one legacy banking system to a completely different debt collection system. The original signed contract. Maybe it didn't make it across.
The notice of default.
Maybe it's just a line item on a spreadsheet now, not the actual document.
And we're back to our first point. They can't defend what they can't prove.
Precisely. If the debt buyer can't produce the original documentation because they got lost in the sale, they are very, very vulnerable to a challenge. So while dealing with a sold debt can be confusing, the source suggests it can actually be an opportunity to get the default removed faster, if you know how to leverage that missing paperwork.
It's just amazing how much of this boils down to paperwork hygiene. It's not about justice in some abstract sense. It's about who has their filing cabinet in order.
That's the reality of the legal system in this context, yeah.
So let's bring this all back to the listener. We've cracked the code on these 4 factors. But what does this actually mean for someone listening who, say, wants to buy a house in 6 months?
It's all about expectation management. That is the key takeaway here. If you're going to engage a professional, or even if you're trying to do it yourself, you have to know who you're up against.
It's not a guessing game.
No. As Dussel says, they know creditor A is on average a 7-day turnaround. Creditor B is more like 30 days. Creditor C is a 90-day nightmare. So if you need a default removed because your finance clause on a house expires in 2 weeks,
And you're dealing with creditor C.
you are in trouble. And it's just better to know that up front. If you know the specific creditor factor, you can make realistic plans. You might need to extend your settlement date or look for a different lender. It stops you from pinning your hopes on a deadline that was never going to happen.
I also want to touch on a distinction the source makes about who is doing the fighting for you. We've mentioned MyCRA as a law firm. Why does he emphasize that so much? Law firm versus credit repair company. Is that just a fancy label?
No, it's a regulatory distinction with real teeth. A law firm has professional obligations and, crucially, legal privileges that a standard credit repair agency just doesn't have. They can initiate legal proceedings. They can demand documents in a way that carries the weight of potential litigation.
So it's the difference between asking nicely and asking with a lawyer's letterhead.
In many ways, yes. But it's also about the ability to interpret the evidence. If a creditor sends back a complex log of interactions, a lawyer is trained to find the one tiny breach of the Privacy Act hidden in all that data. A non-legal agent might just miss that nuance.
Okay, before we wrap up, we have to talk about the landscape because it's changing. The source material mentions a massive piece of news. Ilion has been bought by Experian.
This is huge. For a long time, Australia had 3 main credit reporting bodies: Equifax, Experian, and Ilion. Now, Illion's basically being absorbed into Experian.
So we're moving to a two-player system.
Essentially, yes. Equifax and Experian.
What does that mean for the consumer, do you think?
Well, it simplifies things in one sense, fewer places to check your report, but it also means data is becoming more centralized. The big data is getting bigger. And as these systems integrate, the technology usually gets better.
Which brings me to a thought. If the tech gets better, does the sloppy creditor just disappear?
That is the big question, isn't it?
Let's synthesize this. We've learned that your financial fate isn't just about your debt. It's about this creditor factor.
We've identified 4 pillars. 1, compliance culture. Are they tight and fast or sloppy and slow? 2, relationships. Can you get past the call center? 3, attitude. Are they logical or are they stubborn? And 4, debt ownership. Has the paper trail been broken?
And the big aha moment for me is that when you look at your credit file, don't just stare at the amount. Look at the name of the company. That name tells you a story. It tells you if you're in for a 14-minute sprint or a 3-month marathon.
Exactly. Bureaucracy isn't a monolith. It's a collection of different personalities, different systems, different flaws. And understanding which one you're dealing with is half the battle.
It changes how you see the whole system. It feels less like a brick wall and more like a puzzle you can solve if you have the right pieces.
And that leads to a provocative thought to leave with the listeners. We mentioned the consolidation Experian buying Ilion. We mentioned technology improving.
Right.
As AI and automated compliance systems become cheaper and more widespread, the era of the sloppy creditor who loses paperwork, that might be coming to an end. It's going to be harder to win on a technicality if the records are always perfect.
So that window of opportunity might be closing.
Perhaps. But then we're left with the human factor, the principal fighter. Even if their records are perfect, will the stubbornness of certain institutions always be the biggest variable? Can technology ever really fix a corporate culture that just refuses to say yes?
That is something to chew on. Whether it's a computer saying no or a stubborn risk manager saying no, the result feels the same. But knowing why gives you the power to fight back. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Always a pleasure to unpack the details.
We'll see you on the next one. Keep asking questions.